There was, of course, a great philosophical argument going on during this time. Was this good or bad, this industrialization, this enormous concentration of wealth? Well, farmers in the middle class tended to say no, and of course, the monopolists themselves argued very strongly that it was good. The rich, the wealthy focused on individualism. They argued that with hard work, anyone could be one of them. They said the difference between a Rockefeller or a Carnegie or a Jay Gould or any of these other extremely rich people was simply hard work. And if you were not rich, it was because apparently you were lazy. The truth is, virtually all of the people who were in this class of incredibly rich people were born rich, are born with enormous connections, or had gotten some major break. Now, they love to point to Carnegie because Carnegie, or it's actually Carnegie, was born into a poor Scottish family and came from poverty, more or less, and worked his way up. Now, he also got a huge government contract along the way and other big breaks, and certainly got lucky. But it allowed wealthy people to point and say, look, if you worked hard, you could be like Carnegie. You could be the richest man in the world, which he was. The rich claimed that they had earned it, and the poor were lazy, stupid, and careless. Now, this came to be called social Darwinism. A man named Herbert Spencer popularized this. And Darwin hated it, by the way. Darwin argued, first off, that this evolutionary process, the survival of the fittest, didn't happen over the course of a few years or even a lifetime. It happened over the course of thousands of years. And what happened over the course of a lifetime or even 10 lifetimes was largely just random chance. It didn't have anything to do with fitness or evolutionary concepts at all. He also pointed out that all he said was that the better adapted species would procreate more. There would be more of them. And if you look at it from this perspective, the Darwinian winner is the poor, because there's a lot more of them than the rich. And so Carnegie rejected social Darwinism, but it was widely believed by the wealthy and a great many of non-wealthy people who accepted this as making sense. There's also going to be the gospel of wealth that comes along during this time. I think of this as the Spider-Man idea. With great power comes great responsibility, right? In 1901, Carnegie writes a book called The Gospel of Wealth. And what he says is that the capitalist should take what they need for their own, to upkeep themselves, for their own upkeep. And of course, that number is going to be a lot higher in their minds than you might think it is for you. And then take all the rest of it should be used as a trust fund to help society. And so Carnegie founded Carnegie Mellon University. He built Carnegie Hall, the great concert hall in New York City. Although it's worth noting that Carnegie Hall is a fairly elite institution. It wasn't like homeless people could go in there and watch a show or something. But he did build libraries all over the country. The idea being that if you're hardworking and ambitious, but you don't have a lot of opportunity, you could go to the library and better yourself through reading. And so Carnegie put a lot of money into this sort of thing. But we see institutions and universities and concert halls and parks and all kinds of things all over the country named after these very rich people, because this was their idea of giving back. I've been very successful, and so I'm going to give back to my society. Then we have Horatio Alger. Horatio Alger was a disgraced minister. He had been thrown out of the church for inappropriate activity. And he started a second career as an author. He wrote more than 100 books that all had the exact same story. The story was this: a poor kid works really hard and becomes fantastically wealthy. And then there's almost always going to be some kid who's born rich and doesn't work hard and becomes poor. This didn't happen in real life. This was almost unheard of. The rich tended to stay rich and the poor tended to stay poor. But Horatio Alger managed to introduce this idea, or at least strengthen this idea in our society, that people's status in life was based entirely on their work or lack of work, and not on things like their status of birth or random chance. Similar to this, by the way, is Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, which puts a little bit of a twist on this. And her lead character in Little Women refuses to marry. Women were expected to marry so they could have a stable life, a steady income. But she wants to be a writer, and through hard work she becomes a successful writer, not unlike Louisa May Alcott, the author herself. I should also mention Reverend Conwell, who will go around the country preaching that most millionaires began in poverty. This is nonsense. With the exception of Carnegie, virtually none of them began in poverty. But of course, if you're justifying something like social Darwinism, this is the message you want out there. Not everybody agreed, as you can imagine. Lester Frank Ward will write a book called Dynamic Sociology in 1883. He argues that intelligence, not natural selection, not social Darwinism, should control society. And he believed that basically scientifically minded researchers and technocrats could make a better society. The Socialist Labor Party was founded to this end in the 1870s, but it didn't attract much support and would later transform into the American Socialist Party in 1901. More on them later. By the way, Lester Frank Ward's a guy on top there. Henry George will write a book called Progress and Poverty in 1901, and he will blame poverty in America on the monopolist, on the capitalist. And he'll suggest a single tax plan where all we do is tax land. This was still at a time where people considered land to be the source of wealth. We don't really think that anymore. Edward Bellamy, the man with the mustache here, wrote a Rip Van Winkle story called Looking Backwards in 1888. Sold 1 million copies, which was a lot of copies at that time. In this story, a guy falls asleep and he wakes up a long time later to find out that while he was asleep, all the corporations merged into one giant corporation that was wildly corrupt and horrible and evil, and the government took over that one corporation, and with the government running it, it was all benevolent and good, and it created a utopian society. I don't know how many people think that today, but that was Bellamy's idea at the time. By 1900, artificially high prices, which are caused by monopolies, because monopolies destroy the price mechanism. There is no supply and demand in a monopoly because the monopolists can charge whatever they want. Our supply and demand is ineffective, I should say, technically. And so they overproduce. The overproduction leads to a crash in the economy when they fire workers because they're making too much stuff, and prices collapse, which lead to instability in the currency. And so we go through this extreme period of boom and bust, 1873 to 1900. We see rapid growth in the economy followed by immediate collapse over and over and over again. And this is going to lead to a strong anti-capitalist sentiment that's going to develop in the early 20th century, which we'll get to in a few chapters. Incidentally, this is not unlike the last, 20 to 30 years in America here, where we've had these booms and busts with a relatively unregulated economy.